Everyone, thank you very much for logging on to this Zoom video conference meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. My name is John Turner. I'm the Democratic Services Officer for the meeting, and I'm assisted by my colleague Kate Sheldon, who is the host of the meeting. The meeting is a public meeting and in alignment with the new regulations which permit meetings to be held by remote means, will be live streamed for the public to view. In order to ensure that the meeting runs as smooth as possible, can I ask all participants to keep themselves on mute when not speaking? And if they wish to speak or contact the chair, they can use the chat facility. One further thing for members of the public, if you see members and officers looking to the left and right of the screens, they're not being distracted, they're merely looking at information displayed on other devices. I'll now hand you over to the chair of the meeting, Councillor Mick Rooney.
Oh, thank you, John, and welcome to all of our attendees this morning. And if anybody should be out there listening or watching, good morning to you too. I hope there are. And one day John will provide me with some figures, hopefully, of how well our viewing is going. We will go around the screen for those people who are possibly watching us, just to say who we are and perhaps which ward we represent. So I'll start with myself. I'm Mick Rooney. I represent Woodhouse Ward, and I happen to chair this meeting. I don't know whether you want to say a few words as well, John, although you have just spoken. Well,
yeah, my name's John Turner. I'm the Democratic Services Officer.
I am now going to Kate, who is going to really be annoyed with me. Kate, as in Sheldon. Sorry, there's two Kates.
Good morning. My name is Kate Sheldon. I'm the Support and Civic Manager, and I'm the host of the meeting this morning.
Thank you. Tim.
I'm Councillor Tim Huggan, and I'm Councillor for Crooks and Crossbow.
Steve.
I'm Steve Harris. I'm Councillor for Graves Park Ward.
Sinead.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Sinead Meyer-Richards, Councillor for Manor and Castle Ward.
Julie and friend.
Good morning. I'm Julie Grocott. I'm the Councillor for Stocksbridge and Upton Ward.
Thank you. Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice Nicholson. I'm Policy and Improvement Officer who provides policy support to this particular committee.
Denise.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Denise Fox, Councillor for Burley Ward.
Kate, the other Kate.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I'm trying to improve the lighting. I'm Councillor Kate MacDonald, Councillor for Cleadless Valley.
Thank you very much. Douglas.
Morning, Douglas Johnson, Councillor for City Ward.
Jim.
Morning, Councillor Jim Stanky for Nether Edge and Shara.
Ian.
Councillor Ian Auckland, Councillor for Graves Park Ward. I'm just about to try and fix a flickering light bulb chair as well, so anybody who's going to see me standing on a chair. Well.
Oh, cheers. Be careful. A lot of accidents happen at home, you know.
You're right. It's done now, though.
We don't want a blue light experience, do we?
Low energy Mike. Doesn't work when they don't work.
Mike.
Good morning, Councillor Mike Leavery, Councillor for West Ecclesfield Ward.
And last but not least, simply because you're on the end, James.
Good morning, I'm James Henderson. I'm Director of Policy, Performance and Communications.
Oh, and I have a late arrival, Catherine, who I can meet.
Apologies.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Pritchard, Policy and Improvement Officer, and I've been the policy support for the internal EU exit working group.
Thank you very much. I think it's the first time I don't recollect meeting you before, so hello.
Hello.
Right, that's the welcomes, housekeeping arrangements. As far as I'm concerned, basically, there's just two things. One is keep on mute while you're not speaking. And if you want to attract my attention, use the chat facilities, okay? Apologies for absence, please. I know Ben Curran is unwell. Do we have any others? I don't think so. Everybody
No,
else is here.
that's the only one we've received, Chair.
Right. Exclusion of press and public. There is no reason that I'm aware of to do that.
No items, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interests on today's agenda. I would have hoped that we'd all have some interest in our future post-EU, but nothing specific, I don't think. No. Public questions and petitions, Alice.
None received.
That's the first time, I think.
It is, yeah.
Yes.
Maybe the email's not working. No, I had a colleague check it, and no, we've had none.
Oh, that's strange. Okay. Well, very rapidly, James, you are now at the forefront of today's meeting, along with Catherine. So you can explain to us what you're going to do?
Yeah, by all means. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone, again. So this item is to update the committee on work that has been taking place within the authority around the preparations for the end of the EU transition period, which I think is everybody will be aware is due to come to an end on the 31st of December, and we will be trading under a different and as yet to be determined relationship with the European Union from the 1st of January 2021 onwards. I had hoped that we might have some more clarity about what that arrangement was going to be by the point we got to this meeting, and I'd rather thought that as we were pulling the report together that it might not be terribly relevant by the time that we got here, but that hope proved to be in vain. So to introduce the item itself and to give a bit of context to that, clearly things are going to change on the 1st of January. That is, as I said, still fairly unclear as to what that arrangement is going to look like. So although most of the work to identify and mitigate any threats or risks associated with the change in relationship with the EU will be done at a national level, it is clearly important that we have a good understanding of what any issues might be, both for the City Council locally, and I'll talk about that, and secondly, for the City more widely. And we've been thinking about that in terms of any impact on individuals and communities and impact on the business sector as well. So in terms of the arrangements that we have in place to help manage that, there's effectively two levels of work that are going on. So the Local Resilience Forum has established an EU exit or EU transition working group, or cell as they tend to be called, which has been looking at this from across the Local Resilience Forum. So that is at a South Yorkshire level. It includes all 4 local authorities and a number of other key partners, including South Yorkshire Police, Fire and Rescue, Passenger Transport Executive, and a number of other agencies that are defined in the Civil Contingencies Act. It also includes the City Region Secretariat themselves, and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government as a link into government. And so there has been work taking place at that level for some time. That was kicked off prior to the agreement of the withdrawal agreement at the back end of last year, and has been reconvened in recent months to prepare for a potential no deal outcome on the 1st of January. The second layer of work that has been undertaken is at a Sheffield level. And so the City Council has established a working group internally to ensure that the council is well prepared, and that also includes links into private sector, into the community and into other public sector organisations within the city, particularly the NHS. And the report that you've got before you today is essentially a report from that group, and that, as I said, covers a number of different aspects of the work. So you've also got before you the impact assessment that we've put together, and doubtless you'll have some questions on that. But I thought it might be helpful just to pull out some key areas that we have been considering. And I suppose I should make the point really that the reality is here that our ability locally to mitigate any of the issues and risks that are coming out of the end of the transition period is fairly limited. Much of the work is being done at national level, and we will be dependent to a fairly large extent on the mitigations that national government is able to put in place. Having said that, there are some things that we can and are doing at a local level. So if I start with businesses and the private sector, as it says in the report, this has clearly been an incredibly difficult year for businesses with COVID-19 and the global economic shock and the recession that we've seen in this country, resulting from businesses being unable to trade or not able to trade at the levels that they were previously. So we've got the issue of COVID, and then effectively we have now a concurrent issue with the end of the EU transition period. I think it is fair to say that businesses are not as prepared as we would ideally like. That is something that is reflected in the government's reasonable worst case scenario for the end of the EU transition period. And we know that locally, having done work through Business Sheffield and through the Chamber, that business preparedness and resilience is not as strong as we would ideally have wanted, particularly for manufacturing, exporting businesses, but also importing businesses as well, or those within the supply chain. We are now making preparations to support business, and as it says in the report, the council, through the money that the government has provided for Brexit preparations, has funded some additional posts within the Chamber of Commerce to help support businesses who are engaged in international trade. And we have discussed within the working group that we've got locally what additional support we might need to provide in the period after the formal end of the transition period on the 1st of January, recognising that businesses are not as prepared as we would ideally like, partly because of COVID. That work is being coordinated through the city region and through the chambers within South Yorkshire, but we will not hesitate to make sure that additional support is available for businesses as we begin to understand what the new arrangement is going to look like. I think it's fair to say that some of these issues are unlikely to become clear on the 1st of January. They will probably take some days, weeks, and months to become clear after that point, to understand what the real impact there is. So we're going to have to think about this in terms of the first 3, 6, possibly even 12 months following the end of the transition period. Second area is around community impact. We are aware the government's reasonable worst case scenario bears this out, that there may be immediate impacts in terms of not necessarily food supply, but food choice and availability of certain foodstuffs. But overall, supplies are considered to be are not to be won't be affected, I should say. But that is a particular short-term risk. There is also a lower risk to fuel supplies as well. One of the things that we need to think about here is the impact of consumer behaviour, and we saw that in the run up to the first lockdown period with COVID, that there were not necessarily overall food supply issues, but we saw that food was not as available as it usually would be. There is the potential for that sort of issue to reoccur with this. We're taking steps to ensure that we can get food supplies to vulnerable people. Our local community response teams are on alert to be able to provide food packages to vulnerable people. We're also talking to the food bank network within Sheffield. We are ensuring that they have sufficient stocks, and we're putting in place arrangements with wholesalers and food suppliers on a contingency basis should there be an issue with food supply to food banks and vulnerable people. So that is a piece of work that's underway, and will provide some contingency on that point. The other point I just wanted to make in terms of the community is the European Union Settled Status scheme. The deadline for that for applying for EU settled status for EU nationals is June 21, so it's not as an immediate issue, but it is something that we're very aware of. The Council is supporting EU nationals who live in Sheffield to help apply for settled status, and then there are additional steps that we're taking for children and young people in our care who are EU citizens to ensure that they have settled status by June 2021. The final aspect that I just wanted to draw out before I finish my opening remarks was just around our service delivery from a City Council perspective. We are not anticipating any impact on Sheffield City Council service delivery on the 1st of January or at any point thereafter. The only issue that we are currently doing some work around is data processing arrangements for City Council IT systems, and seeking assurance that we are able to continue to process data, or those suppliers, I should say, are able to continue to process data in the absence of the EU taking steps, or the EU and British governments taking steps to provide verification of the data processing standards in the two jurisdictions. So that's some work that is ongoing at the moment, but we have received assurance on most of our key systems now, including critically liquid logic, which provides our social care system. I'll pause there. There's quite a lot in that, and I appreciate I've gone through that at some pace, so doubtless there will be some questions from members of the committee.
Indeed there are. Do you want to add anything at all to what James has said, Catherine?
Not for the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay, right. Steve Aries.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, James. My question's around the two jointly funded advisors jointly with the Chamber, which the report says they're part funded. I just wonder whether you could elaborate about that. If they're part funded, what is the rest of the preparations fund being used for? But also, more specifically, about the role of those two trade advisors. It strikes me that I hear what you say, that a lot of the impact won't be known until, after, we're well into the new year. However, I do think that the role, the need for advice, which I know that the Chamber does currently provide around training. I'm thinking in terms of perhaps the SMEs and the smaller to medium-sized enterprises, whether they be exporting or importing. It's the mechanics of the nitty-gritty of the documentation, the shipping documentation, which at the moment, as the UK is a member of the EU, over the years has become very much simplified, and I can anticipate that that's going to present a huge problem, specifically for those SMEs that handle the mechanics of the process, exporting and importing themselves, and perhaps don't have the resources to use freight forwarders and that kind of thing. So I just wonder whether you could elaborate whether there are 2 trade advisors sufficient. Are there any plans? What along that really? Thank you, James.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Ayres. To take a step back, I suppose, it's very well. I think we know that the relationships are going to change, actually, whether there is a deal or not. So a deal will avoid the tariff barriers being put in place, but it is likely, or no, that there will still be some significant non-tariff changes for exporting and importing businesses within the city, and so that support for businesses, I mean, ideally to be ready for that, but if they're not ready, to support them after the transition period to have the processes in place is really important. So the funding that is being made available, there's been funding provided both to the City Council and to the city region. So we're trying to have a joined up approach around the support that we're providing to businesses for this. So there's been some BASE funding that's gone directly to Sheffield City region on that. The 2 international trade advisors that we have in place at the moment have been effective in terms of reaching out to some of our key manufacturing businesses, both from an importing and exporting point of view. I think you're right in saying that there will be a need for more specialist support, particularly around some of the customs declarations and so on. And one of the things that we are discussing within the group is from the beginning of January, stepping up some more specialist support for businesses during that period, working with the Chamber. So there are some conversations going on about that, but we are looking to make available some of the remaining EU transition funding that we've been given by government to support that. So that will be hopefully in place from the beginning of the new year.
Thank you for that, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, someone knocked at the door and I got distracted. It's Julie Grocott next. You're muted. It's still muted, Julie.
Finally, sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, just a few points, if I may. Firstly, how are we liaising with the town and parish councils to make sure that they're Brexit ready and have all the information they need, bearing in mind, you know, they buy services and goods and employ people and so on and so forth. So I'd just like to know how we're making sure that they're ready for Brexit. Picking up on the point that Councillor Ayres made, I think, you know, we need to be sure, and are we confident that the businesses are getting all the help and support that they can get, and that will be there moving forward post the 1st of January, because I do think that is going to be really quite important. And then moving on to schools and young people and the professional qualifications that we say are being needed, and that, you know, there's going to be a new system in place to make sure that that happens. Is that ready yet? Is that going to be ready for the start of the new school term? And if not, what will happen in the interim? Because clearly, you know, we need to make sure if we've got professional people going into schools that they have got the qualifications and the proper checks and so forth have been done on them. So I think it's important that we've got some reassurance about if there is a gap, what is happening there. And then really, just to comment at the end, whoever came up with, you know, reasonable worst case scenario, how can you possibly have a reasonable worst case scenario? That is just a comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Grocott. I'm not going to take the blame for reasonable worst case scenario, but I take the point. It's a terrible term. So, just taking the points in order, town and parish councils, we will make sure that they are provided with as much information as we can. To be honest, a lot of that is probably going to be signposting to government information, because that's where the majority of the mitigation rests with, and actually where the majority of useful information is. But I will make sure, maybe I can liaise with you after the meeting to ensure that we get the information through to town and parish councils. Business support and the need for business support to continue after January. Yes, we absolutely recognise that. We talked about that actually in our EU exit cell meeting or working group meeting yesterday. We're looking to ensure that that's in place. As I said, we have got funding available to us to be able to continue that after January. So that's very much the intention, that that's going to be there for a period of time after the end of the transition period. The schools and young people and professional qualifications point, I don't know if Catherine wants to say anything on this one, but I think that so there's probably a couple of related points about here. So there's the settled status for schools and SCC employees who are EU citizens, and we're supporting all of our workforce who are EU citizens to ensure that they have the EU settled status applications in and processed before the June 21 deadline. The conformity of teaching qualifications is probably not something that we're going to have any control of at a local level. So we'll be very much dependent on government rules around that. I will take an action from this meeting to check with the Director of Education and Skills, Andrew Jones, just to ensure that schools are cited on that. Catherine, I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that. I know you've been in touch with colleagues in that area of the council. I don't know if that's come up in your conversations at all.
Yeah, I just reassure that there's no services where there's any concern really about EU settled status. They're making sure that everyone is applying for that as much as we really can. In terms of the qualifications, it is a government scheme that they're looking to do, so it will be kind of reliant on government. So it's kind of waiting to see what happens, I'm afraid.
Okay, Julie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Could I just interrupt? I'm struggling slightly with this EU settled status situation. I'll give you a practical example. We know a Hungarian family lives just up the road from us. They've been here about 8 years. Children spent a part of their lives in Hungary and the last 8 years of their lives in this country. Do they have to apply for EU settled status? And would they know that?
The answer to whether they have to apply is yes, they do. They should know that. There has been a significant amount of government communications activity on it. Whether they know it or not is another question, really. We did quite a bit of work in the run up to one of the deadlines last year about promoting the EU settled status scheme, and I think we need to do another big push on that before the June 21 deadline. But yes, any EU citizen who doesn't have British nationality will require EU settled status if they want to remain in this country after that June 21 deadline.
With the agreement of my colleagues, can I ask you to do that? That there needs to be a push. We don't want people suddenly realising, oops, I can't stay here anymore. I'm getting a very fast train out of the country. So that would be appreciated. I don't know the scale of the problem. It may well be that most of those people who know that they need to take this action have done it, but we don't want to take any chances, do we?
Indeed, and I will certainly take that as away from this meeting. I think one of the communities that we're probably particularly concerned about in respect to that is the Slovak Roma community.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Julie, do you want to come back in? I noticed that you've trying to add something to that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can be doing or any information you can give us as local councillors so that we can perhaps put it out into communities and use our community contacts to make sure that that information is hopefully going to the right places as well. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Have a think, James, how we can help.
Will do.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions on finance and a couple on business. What's the actual value of our Brexit preparation funds, please? And also how much of the Sheffield City region got? And could you explain what the working relationship is between, and roles and responsibilities between what the council does and what the region does? And then
thanks, Mike. I'm going to look at Catherine
first. I'll come back with the business ones in a minute.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look at Catherine on the finance point, but the value, I believe, is something in the region of £300,000 for the City Council. Is that right, Catherine? You're going to tell me that I've got my numbers wrong now, I'm sure.
I think it's slightly under that, but I'm just trying to find the figure.
Okay. So yes, and the city region amount I think is a bit less. We might have to come back to you on that one, Councillor Lavery, if we don't have that quite at our fingertips. I've got a figure of 65,000 in my head, so we're not talking huge amounts of money for this. It has to be said at a local or regional level. So it's a question of kind of directing that in the most appropriate way. We have been quite prudent in the way that we have used that money, and we've got quite a lot left over precisely because of what we've just been talking about, that we didn't know what the eventual outcome was going to be, and that we wanted to be able to provide support for businesses in the period after the 1st of January, and potentially also other support as well. So, for example, if we do need to provide additional support to food banks or bring additional food supplies in for vulnerable people, that would be the sort of use that we would put some of that funding to. So we've got a balance of that we can use. Catherine, have you managed to find that?
Just to confirm the figure, so we had 3 lots of £105,000, and so it's 315,000 for the City Council.
And we'll get back to you on the city region point.
Okay. On businesses, do we actually know the state of preparedness for those businesses that are supplying direct to the EU? Have we got any sense of where we are? You know, are we 50% of them set okay to go? Just a feeling on that, please. And then building on Steve's point about SMEs, which is a real concern for me, particularly if they're a component supplier into a sub-assembly which is being exported. do they understand? Have they got the understanding of what they need to do as part of preparing their products and the relevant paperwork to go into the sub-assembly company, or do the sub-assembly company deal with them directly? I have no sense for how that works.
Right. So on the business preparedness point, and I'll try and do. I'll find the exact wording, but I think the going back to reasonable worst case scenarios, the government's reasonable worst case scenario on business preparedness is that I think something between 50 and 70% of businesses will be prepared adequately, which suggests that between 30 and 50% of businesses aren't prepared to enable them to keep trading in a sort of meaningful way. So I'll if I can, I'll try and dig out, because I've got the exact figure somewhere. I just need to find it. So as we go through the meeting, and if I can't, I'll send it to you after the meeting. SMEs, so yes, it's not just those that are directly exporting and importing that we're concerned about. It's also those that are in broader supply chains. Exporting and importing businesses will be sort of initially at the sort of front line of this, and it will be for them to ensure that they've got their customs declarations and other regulatory approvals in place. I was talking to our trading standards officers yesterday as part of the EU transition working group, and they are sort of currently working through the guidance that has been made available and trying to understand what that's going to mean. But those small and medium enterprises will be one of the groups that will be looking both for the international trade advisors and then for this enhanced support that I talked about to work with. But clearly the focus immediately is on the exporting and importing businesses.
Okay.
Okay, Mike.
Yes, thank you.
I think I'm going to have a T-shirt made that says "reasonable worst case scenario" on it. I think they'd go down a bomb, that, wouldn't it? Sinead.
I can say my favourite bad phrase is unmet need, because if it's a need, then clearly it is unmet. So why do we say both? But it's actually to go back to what you were saying earlier, Mick, about EU nationals making sure that they have settled status. And particularly I was concerned, as you have picked, I think James might have mentioned, about our Roma communities, because we know that they are not particularly interested in niceties of law at times. So I was wondering, sorry, and I meant that in terms of legal status and all that sort of stuff, rather than illegal activity, I clarify. What have we done by way of outreach to that particular community, knowing that I think we have two different Roma communities in Sheffield, sort of the Tinsley end, and also in Page Hall. But also, what happens to those EU nationals who don't register by June? What is the proposal? Do they just stay and hope nobody notices, or do they immediately cease to have the ability to work in this country, or what is the actual status after June? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sinead. So we're working closely with the community services team around the EU settled status. So we've been talking to Lorraine Wood and Colin Havard, who I think will be known to you on this. And as I say, some quite a bit of work was done in the run up to the formal exit from the EU earlier this year. So there is work that has been undertaken by the City Council and through community groups as well. But as we said earlier, I think we need to do a further push on that. I mean, this is a government scheme. It's a sort of online only scheme, really. There is a kind of supported version of that, but it's difficult to know from our perspective how many people haven't applied or have applied and have been rejected through that scheme. So I think there's some work that we need to do in the period between now and June on that. The focus in the last couple of months has obviously been on the end of the transition period itself, and we have got a little bit more time on this, but not huge amounts. So as I said earlier, we will take that away and do some more work on it. In terms of what happens to those who haven't applied after the end of June, as I understand it, they will no longer have a residency sort of permit or ability to be resident in this country. And I think kind of in extremis, they would be potentially subject to deportation. But that is something that we need to, I think that, well, that's clearly a central government responsibility, and I think there'll be some stages to go to before we get through to that.
Okay, can I just follow up then and the difference between parents who have come from Slovakia, for instance, and children who have been born in this country? Do they have a right to remain when their parents may not after June if they haven't filled in the forms and things?
That's my understanding, yes.
So could you say that again, James? If we have someone, an EU citizen has a family in this country, the children can stay, but the parents can't.
I think if the children are UK citizens, then they would have a right to remain. If the parents don't have EU settled status, then they wouldn't have a right to remain.
Ooh.
I think that's. I will check that and come back to the committee. I'll get a position in writing on that. But I think that's the position.
That's a worry.
Of course, once you have settled status, if you then have any children, they will become UK citizens. So once you have that status, then your children will become citizens.
I'm considering the children who will have been born in this country, Catherine, whose parents don't have settled status, but assuming that the children do.
I think what James said is correct, but we can get a written statement to you on that.
I think I'm not sure, but I think it's simply by the fact of being born in this country that they are allowed to stay, I think. Anyway, we'll find out, but that's a worry. It's a worry.
Yeah, we'll find out, and we'll get you the information.
Thank you. Have you finished, Sinead? Yeah. Kate MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the introduction, James. I have two questions. We see on the media what the impact is of the uncertainty on businesses. Obviously, there is going to be a period of adjustment as soon as the decision, the Brexit decision, was taken. But I wonder if you can, if you've got any insight into the impact of the prolonged uncertainty created by the negotiations on the ability of business actually to adapt to the future. That's my first question. The second question actually is that I may as well give you them both at the same time, give you a chance to process the second one as well. I wondered if two of our major strategic partnerships, the council, who provide key services for Sheffield, are parts of multinational corporations. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that, but that's where we are. I wondered whether there was any potential implications. So, for example, Veolia and Amy, whose parent companies are not based in the UK, whether or not that's going to cause any complications for them in delivering services and for us in terms of ensuring that those services are delivered appropriately. Thank you.
If I can take those in reverse order, Councillor MacDonald, we do not believe that there are any implications for either Veolia or Amy. Their operations in Sheffield are run through UK companies, so we don't anticipate that there should be any disruption to those. Your first question around the impact of the uncertainty of this process on business, I don't have any statistics on that, but I think from the conversations that colleagues have had with businesses, unquestionably, there has been significant impact of the uncertainty, and clearly businesses now have a very short period of time to be able to prepare for the 1st of January. We're on the 17th of December, we've got Christmas coming up, we've got the impact of COVID as well. So we're in an environment where the capacity of businesses to be able to react in short order to these things is pretty limited, actually. And I think in terms of the preparedness, as I've already said, it is not as high as we would have wanted it to be. And that's understandable because businesses clearly don't yet understand the rules and regulations that they're going to be expected to abide by. So I don't have any more detailed statistical information, but I think it's undoubtedly the case that the uncertainty is not helping matters.
Thank you. That's what I would have thought, but I didn't want to. I thought I would try and get a little bit more independent view on that. Thank you.
You're on mute, Meg.
Yeah, I realise. Sorry, brain finger button. I've lost it. Have you finished, Kate? Okay. It's Ian next.
Thank you, Chair.
Wherever you are. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So dislocation to a system, good or bad. Usually the short-term effects are bad, and so I can only imagine that there's going to be quite a bit of dislocation. But I accept that we're very much in the hands of what the negotiations, even at this last gasp, produce. But just echoing Kate's point, I hope to some extent, looking forward a little bit beyond that dislocation, I think as the council, it would be important that we have a very close handle on how business is developing. So that's dislocation to supply chains in general.
That's okay.
There's talk about import substitution in some cases. Good thing, possibly, for UK-based businesses. Export substitution, that could be very bad for Sheffield with its manufacturing base. I think business sentiment is important, and that's both how people feel in the city and who are in business, and how their customers feel. Councillor Harris and ourselves were reminiscing about our time in banking and in branch banking in my case, and import and export documentation it's a complete pain that we're inflicting on ourselves, even if we have tariff-free access. So I think a lot of this will come through partners, Chair. So we do fund the citizens' advice, and I imagine that they may need something extra out of any funding we've got. Tesco's are saying if there's no deal, 5% on shopping bills on your weekly shop. I mean that's a big hit for a lot of our citizens. It is not trivial. It's a bit high finance for a lot of people, but if the pound is going to sink a bit further, if there's a poor deal, then that's going to impact on us quite a bit. So I hopefully people will agree that there's a need for quite detailed intelligence on this, and then we have to make something of that. The other end of the scale is quite parochial, I guess, but I think we still do have some tenant farmers specifically who are tenants of ours. So I don't know if we've had any conversations with them to see because agriculture is meant to be a sector that's potentially hard hit. Sheep particularly, and last time somebody talked to me, we have a Graves Park animal farm. It's not just a showcase of a few furry animals, guinea pigs and the like. Last time I was speaking to somebody, we apparently run it as a proper type farming operation. So we've got a flock of sheep and cattle and things. So I don't know if anybody's thought about what effect that's going to have on the park finances, good, bad or indifferent. But I'll mention it here, Chair.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
me done.
Thanks very much. James.
I'll be completely honest, and so we haven't done that piece of work in terms of our tenant farmers or Graves Park, but we will go away and ask the question on that one. I don't anticipate that there will be a massive day one impact, but let's find out. I don't know.
Maybe
and just on Councillor Auckland's broader points about surveillance.
It is a direct connection we have, though, Chair. Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, no, I understand that. The points on business surveillance, I think, are absolutely right. The city region are doing quite a lot of work, and they've got a very good economic surveillance function now that they've got stood up, and they've been doing some work around Brexit already. So I'm confident that we've got that in place, and we'll have access to that. So I'm reasonably all right on that one.
I don't know, maybe at the risk of being controversial, maybe we ought to have a conversation with the farmers about replacing the sheep with solar panels, which seems to be happening quite a lot around the country. Anyway, that's just food for thought and
I don't think you can say that in front of a Welsh member, Mick.
Pardon? You've got plenty of sheep. You could get rid of a load and still have thousands and millions of them.
It's dire for sheep farmers, apparently.
Tim.
Just on that last point about sheep and solar panels, you can still graze sheep and have solar panels on your fields, because
Can you put them on the back?
You can put them underneath. It depends how they're constructed, but basically you can graze sheep. Before I digress. There's just a few things, because you can do, yeah. Having seen the sheep when I was out working on solar farms, knowing about that. So yeah, a few things where you've touched on, James, trading standards, because we're going to lose access to a lot of cross-European cooperation. So a lot more dodgy goods are likely to be flooding this country. First of all, how are trading standards dealing with things? Secondly, you talk about school meals. I just want to sort of move on a bit, because what we need to do is be looking at our careers service and careers advice and all those implications that we need to beef up to make sure that our children in our city, as they progress from high school through to university, and their careers options and what they will have and what they will need at the earliest possible stage in order to be able to pursue the career they potentially want to do, and the implications that may have with our exiting from the European Union. The third thing is tendering, because obviously at the moment we have to tender in the European Journal. We've got to make sure that our tendering system is robust enough within Sheffield so that we're not giving out, as this government appears to be, dodgy contracts to mates and friends. And the fourth thing is with business is how we're dealing with e-commerce and people who are doing the small scale stuff e-commerce wise and doing small scale exports that they may not realize what the implications are for them. Are those sort of things that we need to be looking at in the plan in the future, and how are we getting on with those?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hagen. I'll take those in order. First question was around trading standards and how they're gearing up for this. As I said, I was talking to Ian Ashmore, the Environmental and Regulatory Services Manager, yesterday, who's responsible for that area. They are doing a lot of liaison across the trading standards sort of officer network to ensure that they are as prepared as they can be. It's another area that, depending where we get to in terms of the outcome of the negotiations, we may want to, or we're thinking quite clearly about putting additional funding and resources into that area to support them through the initial part of the brave new world of how we trade. I think clearly the issues of importing goods are very much at the front of people's minds on this, and there's a lot of, as members will be aware, that there is a lot of sort of hidden stuff that will come as a result of this. So Ian was talking to me yesterday about cosmetics manufacturers. Apparently there is a register of cosmetics manufacturers that is maintained by the European Union, and cosmetics products are regulated through that. How that will then be translated into UK, whether that will happen piecemeal, whether people will have to reapply, those sorts of things, and they tend to be very sector specific, and trading standards will probably have to do quite a bit of work around that. And also there'll be companies trying to get competitive advantage through this, so if they feel that a competitor is not compliant with the new regime, then they may seek to use that for their advantage. So that creates workload for trading standards as well, having to arbitrate in those sorts of cases. So trading standards are very much part of the EU transition working arrangements that we've got internally. The other point just to raise on kind of trading standards and regulatory is that we are aware that there may be a request from Doncaster in particular around mutual aid support if there are issues at the airport. So we've got that one on our radar as well. Secondly, careers advice and options for school leavers. Yes, I think that's something that we'll be looking to pick up. We'll talk to the Director of Education and Skills about that one, and just understand what needs to change in terms of careers advice. I'm not well sighted on that point at the moment, but I think it's one that we need to pick up. Tendering. So I suppose all I can say on this is that firstly, commercial services are very aware of the changes that are coming in terms of EU transition. The Council standing orders will remain in place regardless of the UK status in relation to the European Union. So our approach to tendering and the way in which we do that will continue to be as rigorous as it has been up to date. So from that point of view, I wouldn't expect to see any significant changes whatsoever in terms of our tendering and procurement arrangements. And then I think your final point was around e-commerce. That will be being picked up through the business support that is being provided, and I'll make a note to just talk to Yvonne Asquith in Business Sheffield about that one to ensure that we've got support that is available and useful for our SME e-commerce businesses.
Tim, okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, we've got years. I mean, this is going to be negotiations till we die and beyond, unless we rejoin the EU on this. So this is lots of ongoing bodies of work we're going to have to as it changes. I mean, the pet passport scheme announced yesterday was exactly as one would expect from a non-member of the EU to happen. And some of the stuff where you say you don't know what's happening, we're really only negotiating on a zero tariff regime. Most of the rest we probably know, because they're not negotiating on anything other than that. And that's all they're looking for, is a zero tariff regime. It still means all the documents and everything else is going to be in place, so we can make sure that we get a move on with that, because we know exactly what that's going to be, even when they have Boris's fantastical deal next week, which I presume will be announced, which will be a very, very thin deal.
Just interrupt for a moment or two. The thing that strikes me is that we've got the COVID situation, which is causing a lot of extra work, and this is going to cause a lot of extra work. Where are the bodies coming from to deal with this? Because unless they've elongated the day to 30 hours a week, 30 hours a day, I'm struggling to understand where the people are that are going to do all of this. You can look, you can just sit there and look flabbergasted, James, if you want.
I'm not flabbergasted, but I don't know that I have an adequate response to you. I mean, from a kind
It's
of
a serious point.
No,
Though,
I agree. It's a serious point. From a trading standards business advice point of view, we're reasonably confident that we can get additional people to support that. In terms of the sort of broader aspects of city council preparedness, it's one of the going back to our favourite phrase of reasonable worst case scenario. It's actually within the it's actually within the central government's threat and risk assessment that local capacity and capability to undertake this is significantly lower than it was at this point last year because of the concurrency of COVID. That a lot of, or any spare capacity that we might have had to dedicate to EU exit has effectively been swallowed up in terms of our ability to prepare by our ongoing response to COVID. So we are doing what we can, and we have got arrangements in place, but certainly in terms of where we would, I think, ideally want to be in terms of being able to provide the kind of support and resource to this, we're not able to do so because of the other pressures that clearly exist within the authority in the city at the moment. So we're doing the best that we can under the circumstances, but I would be lying if I sat here and said that we're exactly where we wanted to be on this.
I'll just ask one more and then I'll get out of the way. And would it be fair to say that you are actually having to make decisions, not you personally, but you and your colleagues, between dealing with a COVID issue and an EU issue? So you're having to make choices as to which one you deal with?
I don't know that it's about making choices between which one we deal with, but we're having to deal with both of them. And we are looking to ensure that we have got sufficient capacity and work undertaken on each of those points. Clearly, COVID is a very pressing public health crisis, and lives are very much at stake there. So we're not, and I wouldn't want the committee to think that we were taking our foot off the gas in terms of COVID response in order to undertake work on EU exit. But what we are doing is utilising the capacity and capability that we have got to ensure that we have got some focus on EU exit whilst maintaining COVID. I suspect that's not a terribly satisfactory answer, Mick, but
it's very diplomatic. Jim Stanky.
Thanks, Mick. Just 2 points of clarification and then 2 questions. Just picking up the work on the deadline for EU settled status in terms of the work of the CABs and Sheffield Citizens Advice. The Sheffield Citizens Advice is linking up with other CABs at the moment who are doing sessions elsewhere in the country in kind of a mother language, really. So there was one recently in Polish, where basically online that anyone anywhere in the country can link in, and different CABs are actually organising it. So it might be quite good to kind of get publicise that really in terms of amongst all members, in terms of how we link in with that. And the other bit of clarification is that the issue about what happens in terms of where children have the right to stay here but parents don't. My understanding from this, and maybe people here know more about this than me, but is in terms of under the Article 8 of the Human Rights Act in terms of right to family life, that which has mainly been a route used for refugees, asylum seekers at the moment, will be increasingly used for people who are in this position from the EU, and the immigration courts are gearing up for that really later this year. And also, those people who would represent people in that in terms of solicitors, etc. So I do think that there's a real, there's a real issue there, and people are needing to respond to it. And again, if we could be kept maybe in touch with how that's going, so if we do come across cases, that we feed people through.
Chair, can I just interrupt? Sorry, Jim.
Yes.
Can you clarify what the what that actually means? You said they're doing this practice, but you didn't say what the practice is.
Oh, if the child has the right to stay here and the parent doesn't, then you apply under the Article 8 in terms of right to a family life, that the parent has to stay with the child, and that's a route that work with in terms of refugee field, but that would be increasingly potentially used in the EU field in terms of future. The two questions I've got is, the first is about the supply chain disruption, and I know people are not meaning this, but it worries me that there is sometimes a perception that local procurement, local initiatives, etc., all very worthy in terms of food supply, but compared to the disruption that potentially there's going to be on the supply chain, where we are so dependent on importing food in this country at the moment, that the sheer scale of that disruption compared to what certainly in the short to medium term increased supply locally, and it's how do we kind of get that over, really? And it's referred to in the report, and I thank James and Catherine for the report, which I think is great, but I think we need to kind of give people a sense of that disruption, and not to look at local solutions, but the mismatch between them, I think, is so massive that we really it would be deluding people if we said it to be done. The second bit is related to that, is about the use of food banks, and there is just something that when we were taking back control, that the idea of increased use of food banks might be a consequence of that, and that I think that was when I was reading that in Catherine's report, very powerful, I thought. And the concern I've got is that how that may be hidden by, everything like it's all due to COVID-19, and we can carry on blaming that for years to come in terms of increased poverty. And, bearing the fact in mind that the Bank of England governor is saying that Brexit is a bigger financial hit than COVID. How do we kind of expose that poverty that's actually been caused and sustained by Brexit, as opposed to just people blaming it on COVID? And I do think we have a responsibility to kind of highlight the impact of that poverty. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. So on the use of food banks point, I think what we need to do here is to ensure that we're working closely with the food banks to understand how the use of food banks changes in the period following the end of the transition period, and I think that's the best way of ensuring that we get a good handle on that. And I suppose food banks is being used here as a bit of a proxy for broader issues of poverty and deprivation that might be caused. Clearly, COVID is going to be a bit of a masking factor on some of this, and doubtless different viewpoints will have different perspectives on the extent of that, particularly also in relation to unemployment. I think it will take some time for the Brexit impact on unemployment to be disentangled from the COVID impact on unemployment. So I think the answer locally is that we need to continue working very closely with our partners to gather the data and to make sure that we have a good understanding of that at a local level, and to report back on that and make sure that that's a kind of a part of our broader work on anti-poverty as we move through the next years, I guess. The other issue you raised about supply chain disruption, particularly in terms of food supply, I think this is quite a difficult one, if I'm honest. The challenge is that the moment you sort of start talking about disruptions to food supply, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're not careful. That kind of talking about panic buying tends to lead to panic buying, even if you're telling people not to panic buy. And we sort of saw that in the run up to lockdown. So we have been doing a bit of thought, really, and it came up at the LRF as to how we can raise this issue without it kind of sparking panic. And clearly the time of year doesn't help from 2 points of view. Firstly, we're in the middle of a holiday period. And secondly, we're more dependent on EU food imports at this time of year than we are at other points of the year, because the UK growing season hasn't started, and that in itself is an issue. So we're more dependent than we might otherwise be. I think what I would say is that, and I can only go on what the government are telling us on this. It's not really an area of kind of council competency, really. But the government's view is that there will not be an overall reduction in food supply, but the choice and availability of some particular foodstuffs may be less than we currently have in place. So the mix of food might not be what we would usually have, but they are saying that they do not anticipate, even in a reasonable worst case scenario, that there will be a problem with overall food supplies. So we need to get that message right as well. The impact, if there is any, is likely to be on fresh foods. So it's not on kind of pasta, rice, loo rolls. Those I know loo rolls are not food stuff, but you know what I mean. So it's likely to be fresh fruit and veg, those sorts of things that are going to be the where the issues are, if there are going to be any.
You finished, Jim? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Denise.
Thank you.
Asked a question already.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, James, for the report. I was sat here thinking about the universities. Do the universities envisage less applicants coming to Sheffield, because that will have a huge impact on our economy and jobs and services, etc., and businesses? So I just wondered if the universities had given some indication to that.
I think, Councillor Fox, in a word, yes, they are worried about that. They've already seen a reduction in applicants this year, and I think, I mean, they've been quite clear in their kind of positioning themselves as international universities and wanted to be welcoming. But I think there's no doubt that is an area of concern for them. We can maybe write to the universities and just ask them what their current view on the situation is. I don't have a particularly up-to-date line from them, but we can talk to them about that if they're helpful.
Yes, thank you, because it's going to have a huge impact on Sheffield, the loss of students. Thank you, James.
Mike.
Thanks, Chair. Just back to the tenant farmer business, James. My great worry with what might happen with agriculture, particularly if there's a no-deal Brexit, is the prices could force some of our tenant farmers out of business. And I don't think that's something we really want to do. So can we have a look carefully at the situation with our tenant farmers? They've suffered rent increases year by year for some years, and some of them are also paying rent because they don't own the farm buildings that they belong to the council. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but I have a worry that some of them might give up if the support's not there in the short term. Thank you.
We'll certainly take that away and have a look at that issue, Councillor Avery.
Okay. I haven't got any more in the chat. James and Catherine, had you finished what you had to say? Yeah.
From my perspective, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you
Sorry.
indicating, Steve, that you want to have a...
Yeah, please. It was
Go on.
follow up on to Julie's question.
Yeah, sure.
Erasmus funding. I wonder whether what's the situation regarding universities and Erasmus funding in the city?
My understanding is that we're no longer a part of Erasmus. I don't know if Catherine knows any more than that. Is that?
Not on that one. I can look into it and get back to you.
We'll look into it and let you have an update on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I must declare an interest in that. One of my sons is due to spend a year in France as part of his degree, so it'd be helpful. Hang on, I pressed the wrong button. There we go. Jim, and then Kate.
So just picking up on Erasmus, my understanding is that unless we positively decide to remain part of Erasmus, which we haven't done at this point, we automatically drop out of it. And that is one of the things hanging on the no deal Brexit at the moment, because if there's no deal, then there's no way, but it has to be specifically requested. And the EU have asked the British government to say, do they wish to remain part of it? And there's been no response yet.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I just listening to the debate, I was just thinking about how important it is. Actually, it's going to be a very, very dynamic situation, and how we need to be on the ball in terms of monitoring it as a council on a virtually day-to-day basis. And how we're actually going to do that, really. I know I'm making a comment about, the dynamic situation and the impact of it, particularly exacerbated by the lack of the short-term nature of the preparations that people can make. So I suppose it was a reflection and then a question about how are we actually going to ensure that we do monitor and respond to such a dynamic situation over the short term and then obviously then into the medium and longer term. I'm less concerned about, but I am very concerned about the short term.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So in the short term, in the next few weeks, the LRF EU exit transition, whatever it is, sale, I forgot got his name wrong there. Has got arrangements in place so we're required to report any changes to our threat and impact assessment through to central government on a weekly basis. For other areas in the country like Kent, I think it's a daily basis. So that is being handled through the LRF. We've got arrangements in place to stand up the sale if we need to between Christmas and New Year. The challenge is that the impacts are unlikely to be felt or known until the 1st of January and the days after that. We'll be meeting again that first week in the new year, and our SCC arrangements are continuing into the new year as well, and we'll meet then too. So we've got arrangements in place to monitor and understand that, and then to put action in place if we need to take any. So hopefully that provides some reassurance. We need to wait and see, I think, what our medium and longer term response needs to be. But clearly, from my perspective, we are going to need to have something in place that enables us to understand how this is panning out over the next few months and into the rest of 2021.
Thank you, James. I think through you, Chair, I'm just concerned that some very sort of difficult issues have been raised today, and personally I think some of the stuff about food shortages are over exaggerated. I don't support any of this stuff that's happening, but my real concern is about reassuring people, and we're all talking about the risks at the moment, and I think we ought to be making sure that we're communicating that we are on top of this as far as we can be, despite what the challenges that are being thrown at us by COVID and delayed decision making by government. So I just feel that ought to be a very strong message coming from the.
You've gone, Kate. You've disappeared. You are frozen in time.
Propose to sort of that we do make sure that we are giving very, you know, reassuring messages that in spite of all the stuff that's happening, that we've got our finger on the pulse, and we will be here with our partners to support people of Sheffield through this difficult time.
I mean, that could be a whole meeting in itself, whether or not we are prepared and or not, and who is directing or controlling what we can and cannot be prepared for. My personal concern is about allowing the general public to know what they might be walking into. And I don't know that we are getting that message out. It's all well and good as sat here this morning talking about the various issues, the pros and cons, what might happen, what might not, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure that the general public know what could happen and are in a state where they could be prepared to at least mitigate some of the worst aspects of it. And then you chuck on top of that COVID, redundancies, end up furloughing, they said furloughing, etc. And I'm just wondering what we are doing as an authority to help prepare the public of Sheffield for this. Well, it could be a road crash in January. I don't know. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I'd like to hear comments on what I've just said.
Yeah, I think they're very fair points, really, and I think you're right, Mick, to highlight the fact that that Brexit isn't an incident in or an issue in isolation, that it's coming on top of COVID and various other things that we might be dealing with. I mean, we might have sort of winter weather events or anything like that in the first part of January as well. So we're potentially dealing with a kind of a concurrent set of incidents. I mean, we all know what happened last November with the flooding as well. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we could see something like that too. The challenge is that in terms of preparedness, it's quite difficult to know what to say to people beyond sort of kind of quite general and potentially quite bland messages of the council is as prepared as it can be, and we're doing what we can within the city to make sure. But in terms of practical action that we would be expecting people to take, it's quite difficult to know what that might be at the moment, which is why I'm slightly hesitating. I absolutely understand the point and why we would want to do that. I think our ability to say anything that might be sort of more than just generally reassuring is quite limited, really. My other thought on this is that, without wanting to make a political point, I don't really want this to become the council's problem to solve for people. We've got a role to play. Absolutely, we've got a role to play, and we must make sure that we're able to deliver services and that we can support people when they need it. But fundamentally, this is an international issue that needs to be solved or sorted, or a conclusion reached at a governmental level, and it needs to be for the UK government to lead on some of that stuff. I'm sort of thinking out loud to a certain extent here.
So was I.
Yeah, but that's just my sort of my immediate thoughts on it. So I will take away the point that has been made about what can we do to provide some more of that reassurance to people and get them get them prepared. But I am just a little bit anxious about stepping into a space where we perhaps sort of a kind of neither we're betwixt and between the two positions if we're not careful. So let me take that one on the way and give that some more considered thought than I've been able to there.
I may have given you Mission Impossible there. Kate, Jim, are you indicating or are you just waving at a wasp or something? Mute.
Waving at my neighbour.
Oh, waving at your neighbour. It's not a wasp. Right. Kate.
I agree with you know, the points that have been made. I suppose it's just emphasising what we can do as a council. That's the only point I was actually making. And personally, I think there's as much anxiety, there's an awful lot of anxiety around, and we don't want to add to that. But neither do I think that, you know, it's not sort of being, you know, it's not a Mary Poppins moment, really. So it is actually, I suppose the point I was really making was about communication and making sure that we get that right. Yeah. That we actually, we take up both points about what people can expect within our scope, within our role. And actually, I do think we have a role in terms of saying that within our scope, that we are on top of what it is that we can do for the people of Sheffield. That's all the point I was trying to make. That's the role of the council as you know, it's a leadership role, isn't it? And that was the only point I was making. The two things aren't inconsistent between what I said and what Mick said. I think we're just trying to get the tone right between us. Yeah. And I think that's all the point I was trying to make is really that in this uncertain world, at least can we try and give the public some confidence that the council's here to do the job, even though government might not be. So.
Right, thank you. Is there anyone else on this item? Otherwise, we'll bring it to a close. I think you've got a couple of things to go away and sort out. Hopefully, John has made some record of what those are, and he's giving me the thumbs up, which is great. So you can go if you want now, James and Catherine, and thank you very much for a very informative and interesting morning. And I do mean that. I do mean that. Not very often you will hear a chair of a meeting say it was interesting. So,
well, that's something at least. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Have a nice Christmas.
And you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, everyone.
Isn't that the Chinese curse, Mick? Interesting times.
I'm going to leave on that comment.
I'm just wondering how many curses they can throw at us at the moment. Right. This month, I am not going to forget the last item, as I did the last time I chaired a meeting. I got so carried away that I forgot that we got an item and I closed the meeting early. So, with no further ado, Alice, work programme, please.
Yes, work programme. Page 86, you see, starts the suggested work programme. And next meeting, 28th of January, you'd ask for final report update going forward on climate change. You may have spotted that there aren't actually any minutes as yet of that meeting. That's just a sort of, I think, a timing issue. But I do have very clearly the recommendations that I think you made, and we'll make sure that those things happen from that last session that come forward into the report on the 28th of January on climate change. Particularly, it was around getting something that was a solid report that had some information picked up on some of the questions you asked last time round, and also I've been working with the officers to look at the possibility of the kind of governance option of this committee taking on the role of cross-party climate change and sustainability committee. So the hope is that all of that will be in the report that comes back on the 28th of January. I just wanted to flag that up because we haven't been able to get the minutes, even the draft minutes, kind of ratified in time for you to properly ratify, as it were. The next item that I really wanted to draw your attention to in the work group, it was mentioned last time about having a food poverty task and finish group. And you will know if you've seen your emails that I sent through a suggested proposal for that. It's in a PowerPoint presentation. Quite happy to just run through that now and just get, because there's a couple of asks of you as a committee to basically agree what you want and perhaps membership of the group. So I think either Kate or myself are just going to share the presentation. Can I share screen, Kate? Do I need permission?
No, you can. No, you should be able to share.
Yes, I can. Yeah. Sorry, it's the first time I've done this technical element in a meeting. So you've had this in your emails. So I'm going to run through it, and then I think it's over to Mick to chair it and see what views you've all got. This was the first slide. This was just to give you a taste of what's happening. And if any of you read The Guardian, you will see there was also a headline in that yesterday about how UNICEF for the first time, I think, or certainly the first time in a very, very long time, are actually going to be providing some food parcels to one area of London. So it gives you a sense of the scale of some of the issues around food poverty that have also just been mentioned in all the previous item on Brexit, actually, and exit from the EU. So this is what we as officers have put down, and suggesting that it's about the council's response to food poverty, that it's about considering the extent, impact of what that food poverty is, and particularly amongst the groups and communities across the city. We've left that quite broad deliberately because this isn't about a focus on a particular type of responding to food poverty. It's about actually finding out, I think, for you to find out across the city from the various different sectors, demographics, where some of the issues lie. Find out a little bit more about what we do in the city for food poverty, best practice from other areas, and then for you as a group to look at perhaps what our city council response to food poverty is and what the strategic approach might be, and perhaps how you funding resources and the partnership working, because there's a lot of partnership working that goes on behind the provisions, certainly, of food for those in need, not just during COVID times, but also all times, particularly through the schools with the holiday activity and the holiday hunger systems. Standard approach, reviewing written and oral evidence, identifying those measures, and then producing a report as you would with your findings, submitted to the committee first and then on to the cabinet for response, maintaining that this is a task and finish group of this particular committee, so it's because it crosses all sorts of portfolios. What I'd really like you to do is consider and comment on the proposal and discuss and agree membership of the task and finish group. That's quite key, because if you look back over some of the approach and particularly what the scope might be, I would throw open to you thoughts around whether you want someone regularly in the group at the table, as it were, from outside of not just this committee, so not just councillors, but actually outside of the council. There are a few people you could think about. There's a couple of I know some of you will be not so keen on this. There's a couple of academics in the city who are doing some really, really good work around food poverty. There's also, is it something about making sure there's someone from the voluntary sector who really know what some of the issues are. Potentially, you could have a representative from Age UK. You could have a representative from VAS who are very much behind a lot of the food bank partnership working. So you should all have this. I'm going to stop screen sharing just so that Mick gets a chance to see faces, but I think probably Mick, you'll revert to your chat.
Yeah. Could I just say, I mean, there's a number of questions really. First of all, do we want to do this? Is the obvious one. And we need to make a decision as to whether we do or we don't. And then I suppose once we've done that, the other is the membership. If there aren't enough volunteers from this particular committee, would we be happy to open it up to members of the other scrutiny boards who might have an interest in this? And also, do we want outside participation and the numbers? I'm never, have to be honest, if we do agree outside participation, I'm never keen on having one person because it can be a bit lonely and it can be a bit intimidating. I'm not saying that that is the case, but I'd rather not have just one. Right, okay, let's go. Let's see what reaction we have. I think it's Jim. Or is it Sinead? I'm sorry, Sinead. I can't work out where the last lot of questions.
My question is actually not about this, so I'll wait till this bit of the discussion is finished and then come in.
Okay, all right, Jim.
Just a comment. I think that to actually have external people on this, as Alice has outlined, I think would be very important. I think there's some excellent work being done by some of the academics, and it's not in isolation. They're very much working with VAS and other food banks, and I think that's a welcome approach to be taken. And I think there's potential choice there. And I also think the work that the overall work that VAS is doing in Age UK, and again, I echo your point, Mick, about maybe not just having one person in isolation, but maybe a couple, one academic and one from voluntary community sector. The question really is partly goes back to the previous discussion, which is how we've got a very immediate issue of food banks and the response to the COVID crisis, but it's that longer term approach really and sustainability. And what worries me is that we are looking to a situation where, crisis solved, vaccination sorted, and food banks dropping off, when in actual fact, I think food poverty is going to continue for some time. So I just think it's important that this, although it's a task and finish group, can actually take quite a longer term view about what's going to be necessary. And so the question is what kind of time frame do we think that the group should be really looking at?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, food poverty existed before food banks. It's not just food banks that are an indication of food poverty. It was rife when I was a kid, so it has existed before. I think I've just seen Douglas.
You have? Well, lucky you, Mick.
It was a joy.
Of course, yeah. Thanks, Mick. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, I think it's with the idea, and I agree with you and with Jim. The thing is that, I mean, poverty is poverty. It's not just food poverty. So if we're going to dip our toe into this water, then we should probably be aware it's a big and cold ocean. I mean, poverty is a massive thing affecting a lot of people at the moment, and you've seen that with the COVID stats. Seen graphs very clearly showing that it's the lowest decile, the 10% of the lowest incomes have been very much worse affected by COVID over this last year. So my thought is, I mean, yes, this is an important piece of work to do. If so, it's going to take some commitment. So it's not just a couple of meetings. So yeah, we think we should have some careful thoughts about how to proceed, or indeed whether it's something that is too big for us to take on at the moment. I'm quite attracted by the idea of widening it out to across the scrutiny committees and see if we could, if we're going to take it forward, find a subcommittee of say 7 or so people from across the 84 members.
Okay. I mean, the idea was basically, I mean, we could, what if we are agreeing that we will do this piece of work, then we can have the first meeting to decide how the size of the piece of work that we want to do. We couldn't possibly take on the issue of poverty, but over the last 8-9 months or whatever it is, the council and its partners have been involved in distributing food in an enormous way. And I think what is being suggested is that we have a look at whether or not that is being done to its maximum effect, not to try and cure poverty, but to try and make sure that when we do act in a way in terms of providing people with food and the systems and all of that, that they're working to the best that we can make them, I think. Kate?
Thank you, Chair. I think an important issue is, well, the 2 points I want to make. One is that it's whether or not we want to do a piece of work quite quickly and intensively. It doesn't necessarily have to be the be all and end all. It could actually identify next steps and stuff like that. But as a person who suggested it, it was exactly as you were saying, Mick, about actually taking stock of where we are and what we're doing and whether or not we are doing the right things or could we do stuff better. It's within the context as well of the National Food Strategy that was published fairly in the last few months as well, which is quite an interesting background document. So it may well be, so I support having a group, obviously I would do, but I suppose I do have a bit of a conflict of interest because I did suggest that I do acknowledge that. But I wouldn't like to set up a massive committee. I think the point I wanted to make was a massive committee that's going to churn on for the next 18 months, considering its own navel and you know, making sure that it's all going to be consider every possible detail of every possible issue. So I suppose it's actually about the the key thing about what we aim to achieve and how quickly, because I think task and finish groups actually work best when they give themselves a sort of, you know, a reasonably defined task and over a relatively short period of time and achieve something. So I would suggest making sure that we are actually, I'm trying to think of the word, but we're realistic in terms of what we could achieve, and that we don't try and set ourselves up as a standing committee, and that a task and finish group does what it says on the tin. So that's my view, and I mean, I don't think we should have too many people, whether or not they are external people. I do support having external people because I think it does broaden the perspective, although again, I wouldn't like to turn it into a talking shop. So I'm happy to support it. I think it should be something which is realistic and that we can achieve in a relatively short period of time, because we may not be here, certainly as a committee or members of it after May. So that's really quite important. I think it's a helpful suggestion to include somebody possibly from the voluntary sector, and I'm not a big fan of academics, to be honest. And let me be clear, I live with one, and most of our friends are academics and so on. So I'm not prejudiced. It's just how useful they can actually be in some of these settings. So honestly, that's me being realistic about it. So yeah, those are my comments and reflections, and I hope that the Councillor Rooney would chair the task and finish group as well.
Councillor Rooney is quite happy to chair it. I think in terms of it dragging on, that's entirely up to us. We can make it as quick or as long as we possibly as we can. So that's within our control. I'm trying to establish, and I think I'm establishing, that we want to do this and that we want to do it within a sensibly quick time, and that we do want outside participation, and that maybe we could, at the first meeting, we could just sort of have a general discussion about where we want to go and scope the piece of work. Right. Ooh, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of part of me is torn, because what James Henderson said about Brexit is taking on things that the council can't possibly, you know, do, and it's not its remit to be or to be able to do. There's no point in it setting this up. Sheffield City Council setting itself up as something that it isn't able to achieve at any stage. So it has to be narrow in scope to make sure that we're reaching, that if it's going to happen, it's reaching the right people in a narrow sense, and that we're making sure that people who are coming to food banks, that it's almost whether the city council is got something where they're going to be plugging in other services or giving a particular advice to people to make sure they're accessing the right thing. Because though we've built up a body of expertise in distributing food during COVID crisis, it's not necessarily something that will be sustainable in the long term. I mean, you know, there's a report this morning about UNICEF getting involved with distributing food or giving grants for food banks this morning in the UK for the first time ever. So it's whether we're going to be able to achieve very much apart from, you know, unless it is very narrowly focused, because otherwise we're taking on ourselves too much to be able to do at a city council level that perhaps is for somewhere else.
I think there's a general consensus that it needs to be focused, otherwise you don't get anywhere. It's the scattergun approach is just not effective. And I mean, I said at the beginning, we have had a huge influence and a huge involvement in food distribution across the city. And that is the element that I think is being suggested that we should concentrate on, to make sure that it's being done properly, effectively, hitting the right people at the right time, all of that sort of thing, Tim. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Well, certainly influenced by the discussion, because I heard what Douglas had to say, and I thought, well, that actually it is a vast and daunting task, and it would take quite a bit of time. Sort of like agree with that, but I do agree now we've sort of like refined ourselves, and it was very helpful to hear what Kate had got in mind. So quite targeted on what gaps we need to plug and can reasonably plug, and what things we need, good practices we need to expand. And obviously the scale of the task and when it's going to take place and report has some bearing on how much time you think you're going to give to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd certainly I would like to widen it to other scrutiny boards membership for sure, because I think I'd like to find, forgive me, you know, a real enthusiast. And actually, the scale of inequality, I'm thinking, scale of inequality has got quite a bit to do with the state of the bus services, frankly, if you ask me. And it plays into all sorts of problems that we have. So it could be vast. So focused, yes. An invite to try and, you know, to find somebody who's really keen to contribute to the work and has got some real expertise. And yes, I am in favour of inviting other people in from the food bank, say, and from VAS. Certainly, I agree with that. Other academics. My experience is the number one recommendation other academics make is that there should be more investment in more research. I.e., give us more money. So I'm not so keen on that bit. Thanks, Chair.
Sinead?
Right, it was just to say, I think poverty would be just far too large. So certainly food poverty as a starter. I think we've said digital poverty might be another one afterwards. Yep. And so, you know, it's not all going to go away, is it? So let's do it like the elephant, a bite at a time.
I've never eaten an elephant. Douglas.
Thanks, Chair. I think we're in danger of talking around the issue and spending a long time doing that. So I just went back to look at the slides that that Alice showed us, which are very helpful. Just think about, well, what are we trying to do here? What are we actually trying to achieve? Because we all agree that food poverty is a serious issue. But look at the proposal. It was saying, establish a task and finish group to consider the council's response to food poverty. And I mean, considering it is all well and good, but I mean, we know in very broad terms what the council response is. It's had all the local community response teams in place. It's had arrangements to support food banks and so on. I mean, I don't think there's any suspicion that it's handled that particularly badly. Is it an area that anyone's asked to be called in for scrutiny because there's a suspicion that there's a problem with it? Are we just looking at it because actually it's quite comforting for us to say, yes, we're very concerned about food poverty? Are we trying to solve an issue that's just not there? So my suggestion was the starting point might be just to ask for an up-to-date report from the officers about what the council has actually done so far and what the current state of play is. And we could then make a decision on that as to whether to take it further forward for further scrutiny, or whether we think that we have some doubts about that and that it should be challenged by some outside people from, say, food banks or advice centres who might find a very different point of view. But until we've had that report from officers, perhaps we're not in a particularly good position to do that. So we could ask officers to just produce a written report ready for the next meeting, and then we could then discuss where we want to go with that without necessarily asking officers to attend on that date. There you
are. Yes, that actually sounded reasonable, Douglas.
Well, look at me.
Alice, have you any thoughts on that?
So listening to it all, you've got a time frame issue, because I get a sense that this committee who want to do this, there's a definite yes to it. Yeah, there's always this conversation around how tight is it, whatever, and what the focus is, and you need to get on with it. But there is a time frame, because actually there was only going to be a couple of months really before we get into towards the end of this municipal year, and into, we've got January, February, March, April tops, to actually do something. So I think for me, you've got a pretty heavy agenda in January anyway because of the climate change work. If you want to do this, you keep it tight and focused, as been suggested. You agree to have this work group. You're going to get, it might not be me supporting it, I mean, between us, you are going to get some good officer support. Actually, already we've been a bit tag teaming on it, because both Emily and I have contributed to that presentation that was sent to you. So I would say, yes, you want to do it. Actually, time-wise, probably just get on and do it as a small group. If you want to invite out to the rest of the committee, other committees, which I would see as sensible, that can be done, ready for something to happen for you to meet up middle of January potentially, if we can find time in diaries. And by then, yes, we'll see what we can get from the officers. What I'm very conscious of, and conscious fully of scrutiny throughout all of this pandemic approach, has been that you as a committee, I think, have agreed you don't want to put a big call on officer time, officers who are working hard in response still, and food is one of the areas they're still working in response, but you want to find out. So I think it's a balance of how much you ask of them to physically produce a written document, and how much easier it would be for lining up a few people to come along to a meeting and kind of talk you through the issues. So I'm advising purely as an officer that the sentiment is to get on with it, to have your work group, to invite send your invite out to the rest of the committees, and meet fairly soon in January to then actually nail your scope down and nail who you want to speak to and who else you might want to invite to be a participant and who you want to hear from. That's my quick summary. Does that help?
Yes, it does actually. It's very cute. The reason I'm laughing is because something strange just appeared on Douglas's screen. Julie, I think it was a cat. I thought it was. I was hoping it was, Douglas.
I don't have a cat, I just have a reindeer.
I know, it's a lovely
it's
thing.
Beautiful.
Does it eat much?
Hopefully not. I think Kate raised this issue, and it's an important issue that we do need to think about. Food banks over the last 12 months have been changing in use because of COVID. We've been hearing today about how there may be changes in the use of food banks because we do and we don't know what's happening with Brexit. Like Douglas, I just had another read through of the slides on this that were very kindly produced, and the thing that struck me was where it said the scope was to look at measures to improve food banks and therefore to improve the facilities that are available for the people of Sheffield. And that to me seems like quite a sensible approach, bearing in mind we know that the use of food banks has changed and may be changing further. So I think we could justify doing the work in relation to making sure that how the food banks are running and reacting to the changing circumstances is fit for purpose and is making sure that everyone in Sheffield who needs to benefit from them is benefiting as a result. So for me, I would like the scope to be somewhere around that. And just again to echo what Kate and I think it was Ian said, that doesn't really require any academics to do that. That just is about practical, proper measures to make sure that we get done what we know needs doing. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got Mike and then Kate, and then we're going to make a decision. Okay. Mike Lever.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering about timing on this one. There's so many uncertainties at the moment, particularly with Brexit and particularly with COVID, which in 3 months' time will become a lot clearer in terms of the impact. So, for example, unemployment and how that affects young families and the food poverty that arrives out of all that's going on with COVID and Brexit. Is it for now, or should we consider that it's the start of the next year in 2021-22? I think it needs doing. I think it needs to be tight, but I'd hate to do something that's out of date in 3 months.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, I've no further comment. I just to put something, well, in fact, I did say that it's not just about scrutinising something, it's also about developing our policy. And so that was just a response to Douglas's comment. It isn't necessarily because there is a problem, it's because there is an issue and that we need to actually take a view about it.
Yeah, I understand the point, Mike, but the need and the problem is now. I have no idea what will be happening in 3 months' time, none at all. So what I'm going to suggest is that we go along with basically what Alice said a few moments ago. And what I really need guidance on is how many people we should have, and that will depend on how many people from this committee want to do it. Apparently I do, because I'm chairing it. And who else would like to participate? And is there a sort of maximum number that you will be thinking about in terms of managing diaries and things, Alice?
Well, there's a long-standing view that 6 is a really good number for sort of groups together. I'm not saying task groups. I'm just saying it's a general number of 6 people in a room, 6 people trying to do something.
Right.
But you know, you don't have to stick to that rigidly, but also 10 is definitely unmanageable. So the sort of 6, 7 feels about
Okay.
right. I
All
wouldn't
right.
want to say keep it to 6 and then suddenly that's a problem, but then also you don't want to say, oh, definitely 7. So yeah, it's in that area.
Can I have some indication from today's committee who might be interested? Douglas and me. And Jim.
And Jim.
So we've got and Kate. That's 4. So we have 3 vacancies. I'm not sure what the best way to. I suppose you could just email out the members of the other committees and say we've got 3 vacancies on this task and finish group. Are you interested? First come, first served, and that's it. Yeah. Okay.
You might want to just say 2 because then that gives you scope if you want to invite
The outside ones.
The outside.
Yeah.
You know, it's over to you. It's your task group.
Well,
obviously we provide advice in trying to help facilitate it.
Can we stick with the number of elected members that I said? But I don't think an additional outsider would sort of break, sort of ruin the numbers game. So can we have 2 people from outside? All right, Kate.
My understanding is that there's a food partnership in Sheffield as well. I don't know what the terms of reference are. It might be, you know, we were talking about different potential reps from the community and voluntary sector. I don't know whether that might be a useful source of potential recruits or advice. And let's not forget that we can actually get written advice and input as well, and we can take evidence. So I wasn't disregarding the evidence from academics at all. It's just whether or not that was the best use of their and our time to have them involved in a group. So maybe we can come up with a list of in advance about other possible sources of evidence that the committee might want to take. And I would certainly include, if Jim's got good contacts on that, that's brilliant. But certainly I would suggest that we need to work at the food partnership. To me, possibly, although I don't know who attends it, might be a useful contact as well.
Thank you.
I think there is that balance, if I can share, that it's about, actually, I think there is some value in having somebody from outside the committee around the table groups with the group all the time. But also all these other people that have been suggested, of course, you'd want to invite them to come and give evidence. So, you know, you don't have to have everybody around the table. I think sometimes it is useful to get that external perspective. I think Kate mentioned as well, to have somebody, but you know, we can have that conversation, you know, in the new year. And absolutely, I'll look into. I am aware of the food partnership, Kate. I am not currently familiar with who's on it, who leads it. It's moved around a bit from what I'm aware of. So I think we need to do some research, and I think that's what we'll do, is we'll come up with these options of who could be at the table with you, who definitely should come and give evidence, and that's the kind of prep work as officers we need to do, ready for you to all meet, hopefully mid-January. In the meantime, yes, Mick, there's nothing stopping you sending something out to the other committee members, and we can sort that before, you know, pre-Christmas.
Okay. Final word to Tim.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to have a chat with my colleagues, and we'll come back with some suggestions on this, who we feel best has the expertise to contribute to the group.
Thank you. Helpful, Tim. Right, that's it. Date of next meeting.
Sorry, Mick.
Yes.
I originally.
Oh yes, right at the beginning. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The thing that I wanted to raise was the fact that in March the 21st, we have the 10-yearly census, and this year it's due to be predominantly online. And when we've raised the question of digital poverty earlier, it's something that concerns me, to make sure that we get the maximum return, particularly in those areas where we know that there is more digital poverty, and that obviously we want the maximum return because we know that these figures are then used by the government for all the funding streams and things that follow for Sheffield. So could we have a report from officers on what they are doing in order to maximise and make sure that we get full cooperation from people to take part in the census, because of the caveat of it being like that? It's a big concern for me.
Right, to come to this committee.
Sorry. Yes, I think so, because
Right.
I think we want to see what the council is doing, and that's our overview and scrutiny role, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
Julie?
you.
Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Someone who you all may know, Richard Crowther, is responsible for the census across the city. And I do know from conversations I've had with him that he has got a number of people working with him, particularly around ensuring people who are not digitally connected, who don't have English as the first language, are being work is ongoing with them, and I'm sure he would be more than happy to to come and speak to us, and I do know he has been in dialogue with council officers in relation to that. So I am aware, just from conversations we've had at the town council, that is happening.
If we could invite him, that would be great, Chair. I'm just concerned. I understand that officers have been talking, but nothing has come out to councillors, and we're actually the people who know our patches.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. That's not a problem. I think that's about it. I think, apart from date of next meeting, which appears to be the 28th of January. Can I take this opportunity to wish you all happy, safe, healthy Christmas, and an even better New Year, hopefully with some sign that this plague is going to go away. And could I just say, could you, next time you meet, could you try and put a Christmas jumper or something on? It's only me and Kate took the trouble. That's a bit disappointing, Anyway.
Can I just add that Councillor Peter Price has had his COVID injection, and I hope he's the first of many in this city to start that trek to wellness.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Right. Could I just have a quick word, Alice, before we finish completely? And